Hi students, Miss Vernon here, and I know it's uncommon for us to have a Friday lesson, but today I thought I'd jump on and do a quick review of fractions. That's including adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing. First, we'll start with adding and subtracting. Adding and subtracting is the only time in which we must have a common denominator in order to combine them. So a common denominator is when the bottom of the fraction is the same term. And once that is achieved, we can add or combine the numerators, and then the bottom or denominator stays the same. Let's go ahead and take a look at an example. I have two of these, but we'll start with the left-hand one first. So with adding and subtracting this fraction, the first thing I notice is that I do not have a common denominator. So I need to make sure that the denominator of the left-hand fraction has an x plus 2. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply the top and the bottom of the left-hand fraction by x plus 2. This is allowed because I'm essentially multiplying by 1 or the equivalent of 1. I also need to make sure that the right-hand fraction has a denominator of 3. So I'm going to multiply this by 3 over 3. Again, 3 divided by 3 is 1. So I'm not breaking any math rules. After I've figured out what to multiply by, now I'm ready to do the multiplication. So multiplying the first fraction, I get on the top 4x plus 8. 4 times x and 4 times 2. The denominator of this fraction, I'm going to leave it in factored form, 3 times x plus 2. Next, I'm going to multiply the top and the bottom of the second fraction. 2x times 3 is 6x. And on the bottom, again, I'm going to leave it in factored form, 3 times x plus 2. Now that I have a common denominator, I can combine the numerators. That's 4x plus 6x is 10x, and a positive 8. On the bottom, I'm only going to write the denominator once. Because it was a like or common denominator, I don't need to write it more than once. The last thing I always encourage students to do is check to see if you can reduce. This can be tricky sometimes because now that we've combined the numerators, we then have to see if we can factor. In this case, we can factor out a 2, which leaves us with 5x plus 4. Now, as I look at the top and the bottom of this fraction, I see that there are no like terms, and therefore I can't reduce it. This is my final answer or fully simplified answer. Always check if you can reduce though, and sometimes that means you have to go back and factor first. Let's go on to the next problem. This problem, we will be subtracting. Notice that there is a minus sign here. I sometimes encourage my students to switch this to adding and make the next term or the top of the next fraction negative. That's going to help you not forget about that minus sign and make your problem more accurate. Now that I've acknowledged what's going on, let's work on our common denominator. Currently, there is not a common denominator, so I'm going to take the denominator of the right-hand fraction and multiply it by the left-hand one. I'll do the same on the other fraction, this time multiplying by x plus 3. Now that I've gotten it set up, I'm ready to do my multiplying. 1 times x minus 2 is going to give me x minus 2. The bottom, again, I don't have to FOIL it. I can leave it in factored form. I only have to multiply out the numerators. Multiplying the next fraction, I will get negative 2x minus 6. On the bottom, again, we have x minus 2 times x plus 3. Now that I have a common denominator, I can combine my numerator-like terms and simplify. Going through and doing this, I have x plus negative 2x is negative 1x. I have a negative 2 plus a negative 6, which is a negative 8. On the bottom, I leave my answer as my denominator as x minus 2 times x plus 3. Again, I look to see if I have any like terms. In this case, I don't. Therefore, this is going to be my final answer. Again, even though we didn't have like terms, I always checked because it's very important to not skip that component or part of the process. Let's move on to multiplying. When multiplying, I think multiplying is the easiest, by the way, but when multiplying, you simply multiply the numerators and you multiply the denominators and then reduce when possible. I highly recommend reducing as you go. What I mean by that is as long as you're multiplying, which a dot means multiplying, parentheses also mean multiplying, I like to look for any like factors on top and bottom. In this case, 4 and 2 have a common factor. 4 is divisible by 2, which gives me a 2, and 2 divided by 2 is a 1. Reducing early on in the process will greatly help you afterwards to not forget. So 2x times 11 is 22x, and 7 times 1 is 7. Notice that it's already fully reduced because I worked with the reducing in smaller amounts. Now, you don't have to do it this way, but I do find it's easier. All right, the last concept we have today to talk about is dividing. When dividing, you have to flip the second fraction. Remember, I'm saying the second fraction, and switch the problem to multiplication. Now that it's a multiplication problem, repeat what we did on the previous slide. So let's take a look at the problem I have here. Notice we are dividing. So I'm going to rewrite my problem as a multiplication problem. When I do this, I am going to flip the second fraction. So notice the first fraction stays as is. The second fraction, I'm going to flip it. Now, I did write a times sign or multiplication sign. That might confuse you later, so maybe consider putting a dot or using parentheses. Now that we have written it in multiplication format, we want to check to see if we can do any reducing or factor anything out. I noticed that 2x and 2 have a 2 in common. So I'm going to factor out that 2, leaving me with x plus 1 times 2. I'm also noticing that 5x plus 5 has a common factor of 5. When I factor that out, I'm left with x plus 1. Now, I look at x minus 5. I can't factor that, and x is simply x. So next, I look for any common factors. A factor will be written in parentheses. If there aren't parentheses around the term right now, and there's only one term, you can put it in parentheses to make it easier to recognize. As I look at this, I see that there is an x plus 1 in common on the top and bottom. I don't see anything else in common, so now I can multiply the numerators together, giving me 2x, and the denominators together, giving me 5 times x minus 5. Notice that by reducing as I go, it allows for me to have a simplified answer as soon as I get to the end. Again, it's a great tool and trick to help you along the way. There's your lesson on fraction review and recap. Remember to follow the rules and you'll be fine. Have a great day. Bye now.